Calls for an immediate ceasefire grow louder as the daily death toll climbs higher. The worst fighting in 3 decades has erupted between Armenia and Azerbaijan as civilians are caught in the crossfire. Can a diplomatic solution be found before it becomes all-out war? I'm Ali Hassan, and today's newsmaker is the conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh. It's a territorial dispute between 2 former Soviet republics dating back more than 100 years. But for the first time since a ceasefire was reached in the early 90s, Armenia and Azerbaijan are again on the brink of war. And this time, the fighting has spilled beyond Nagorno-Karabakh, with cities in Azerbaijan being shelled. Now, the conflict is threatening to draw in neighbouring powers, raising concerns about stability in the South Caucasus. But after decades of failed diplomacy, will military force end up deciding the dispute, or is there still a chance for peace? Natalie Pahonen reports.
It's been a week since fighting broke out in the Southern Caucasus. And the scope of this conflict is growing by the day. Azerbaijan and Armenia are fighting over Nagorno-Karabakh. Under international law, the territory belongs to Azerbaijan, but it's under the control of separatist ethnic Armenians. There are no signs the hostilities are about to ease. At least 240 people, including civilians, have been killed. A resident of Azerbaijan's second-largest city, Ganja, has been added to that grim toll.
We heard the sound of bombs. Armenians did it, but we are not afraid. We stand here. We will not leave.
Civilians on both sides of this conflict feel they're under siege. In Stepanakert, Karabakh's separatist capital, some locals have taken to a cathedral crypt to escape shelling.
We have been living in fright, in fear for many years, and this cannot be resolved in any way.
These former Soviet republics are in a region with powerful neighbours. In the late 1980s, Azerbaijan and Armenia went to war over the Nagorno-Karabakh region, but it ended in a ceasefire in 1994. There have been repeated clashes in the decades since, but this fresh violence threatens to escalate geopolitical tensions. Both sides have accused each other of targeting civilians and of employing foreign mercenaries. And they've each disputed the other's claims of battlefield victories. The Armenian government says it's ready to work with Russia, the US and France to re-establish a ceasefire. The Azerbaijani government and its ally Turkey say a lasting ceasefire is only possible with an Armenian withdrawal from occupied Nagorno-Karabakh.
Ve sonuncu şart grafik versin. İşğal edilmiş torpaqlardan erməni silahlı qüvvələrinin çıxarılması cədvəli verilsin bizə.
Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says his country is facing a landmark moment.
We must all devote ourselves to one goal: victory. Make no mistake, we will win.
There have been multiple attempts to resolve this long-standing conflict through negotiation, but political and diplomatic means have failed to keep the peace. With neither side showing signs of backing down, what will it take to de-escalate the situation and bring calm? Natalie Pahonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Tbilisi is Tengiz Pkhaladze. He's a former advisor to the president of Georgia, the northern neighbor of both Armenia and Azerbaijan. He also served as a consul to Azerbaijan. In London is Laurence Broers, associate fellow in the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House. He's also the author of Armenia and Azerbaijan, Anatomy of a Rivalry. And in Brussels, we have Amanda Paul. She's a senior policy analyst at the European Policy Center. Tengiz, the Nagorno-Karabakh issue was known and has been known as a frozen conflict. Why do you think this conflict is flaring up again now?
Good evening, first of all, and I cordially welcome my colleagues. Very frankly, I hate this word because we have no frozen conflicts. Because what we call frozen, actually international society calls frozen conflict. Really, it's absolutely unfrozen. And day to day, we are witnessing clashes and we are witnessing kidnapping and violation and so on, so on. So Karabakh wasn't frozen conflict, maybe not such active as we have right now, but we all witnessing kind of clashes during last 30 years. So today, talking about the conflict, I would highlight that actually it doesn't matter who shoot the first. The main problem is that we are looking for the small pictures, but today the conflict goes beyond Karabakh. So it already covered other territories of Azerbaijan. And the main problem is that this is long-lasting instability, what we have in South Caucasus, and we should think about not the conservation of the conflict, actually what is the frozen conflict, but about the solution. Regrettably, we saw that international organization, the Minsk Group and other international organizations are not enough, efficient enough to solve the conflict and bring the solution on the table, which of course violate the peace building process. So I think today it's the most important to join our efforts to start negotiation process and to bring the real solution on the table.
Laurence, you wrote about this conflict extensively. Are you surprised that we're now seeing an eruption of armed conflict again in the region?
No, there are aspects to what's been happening in the past week that are surprising. I think but the fact that violence has broken out again is not in and of itself surprising. There have been periodic escalations over the last 6 years. Most recently in July of this year, there was an important escalation in the area of the Armenia-Azerbaijan border. And so I think we have to recognize the deep frustration of Azerbaijan in particular with the Minsk group mediation process. And this war is now coming at a time of global distraction. The United States is distracted with elections. Europe is distracted with Brexit and other issues. Russia has been distracted with Belarus. And so I think this has been seen perhaps as an opportunity to reshape the process, to renegotiate the terms of the diplomatic process led by the Minsk group with the more explicit support of Turkey.
Interestingly enough, Amanda, the international community has passed judgment on this conflict quite a while ago. In 2008, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution reaffirming Azerbaijan's territorial integrity and demanding the withdrawal of all Armenian forces. Not much has happened since then, has it?
Yeah, it's true what you say. There's a number of resolutions from the UN asking from the withdrawal of the occupied territories, but these have never been implemented. I think the main focus remains on having a constructive peace process where both sides are ready to make some compromises in order to get a solution to the conflict. And this should be done not just at a leadership level, but also at a societal level.
I'm sure, Amanda, you're speaking to your contacts on both sides. Do you feel that there is a sincere commitment to peace or finding at least a solution here?
Well, both sides want a solution to the conflict, but obviously there are big differences between what sort of solution that should be. I mean, for Azerbaijan, they clearly want to have returned Nagorno-Karabakh along with the other occupied territories. For Armenia, that's not the case. I mean, they view Nagorno-Karabakh as an integral part of, let's say, of Armenia that shouldn't be returned to Azerbaijan. So it's very difficult to bridge, these gaps.
Tengiz, interestingly enough, let's talk about Russia here for a second, because Moscow's role is interesting in that it has good relations with both nations, with both Azerbaijan and Armenia. It has appealed repeatedly for a ceasefire, a call that has not been heeded by both the nations. Does the refusal for a ceasefire highlight in any shape or form a declining leverage on the part of Moscow on both nations?
Actually, it depends what we call good relationship, because Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is used by Moscow as a leverage on the both countries, Azerbaijan and Armenia. And actually, this is the mechanism to prevent large-scale regional cooperation between the nation. And during all this period of time, we see how Russia manipulated with this conflict. And even right now, the preparation for this clash started years ago, and Russia is the country which is selling the military ammunition and equipment to the both parties. So it enjoys at the same time peacekeeper mandate, but at the same time supports the clash. But once again, this is the maintaining stability, which is under interest of Russia Federation. And regrettably, the Minsk group also was shaped under the total control of Russia Federation. So that's why I think that unless the key of this conflict is in Moscow, we shouldn't expect the real solution. And today, supporting such kind of clashes, I think today Russia is waiting, because it sees hostilities, it sees the real clash, and Russia will wait until the very, very last moment. And then we will definitely see the real engagement of Russia Federation, which will be not beneficial neither for Azerbaijan nor for Armenia. So we saw such kind of scenario of Caucasus many times, and I'm really afraid that we will see it in the future.
Amanda, I saw you shaking their head there for a second. Do you disagree with what Tengiz has been saying about the role of Moscow?
Not 100%, but I would say that to a large degree, the other members of the Minsk group have allowed the Russians to take on, the key role when it's come to carrying out the diplomacy between, Armenia and Azerbaijan. I mean, whenever there's been some sort of incident, it's always the Russians that have, rushed to the rescue. They're always the ones on the phone. And this time as well, we've seen, certain EU leaders, I think it was Monsieur Macron, basically, asking the Russians or to President Putin, you need to do something about it. You need to resolve it. So I think there's been some sort of, complacency, or perhaps they've been too keen on giving a very large role to the Russians. It's true that the region is more of a priority to Russia than any other actor, frankly speaking, and certainly the EU. But I mean, as we've just heard, I mean, Russia has several hats in the Caucasus, arms seller, etc.
Absolutely. Laurence, we saw President Aliyev directing some harsh words towards French President Macron today. Does the Minsk group still have the confidence of the two parties in play here, of both Azerbaijan and Armenia?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the Minsk group has lost a lot of political credit in Azerbaijan in particular. But I think we have to look back into history. The Minsk group has sustained consistent negotiations since the early 90s. The talks have never actually broken down. And there have been periods when the Minsk group has worked quite well together. In the mid-90s and at the turn of the century, a number of different proposals that envisaged really quite different approaches to resolving the conflict were discussed in depth and at length. And so, I think, there have been different approaches. I think the key problem, in a sense, is not only at the level of the mediator nations, it's at the level of the strategies that the parties to the conflict have pursued. Part of the problem is that Armenia and Azerbaijan, I think, have always expected the Minsk group to deliver to them what they won or lost on the battlefield. And each side, I think, has always had another strategy, a plan B. For Armenia, that has been to allow the indefinite postponement and procrastination of the process, meanwhile allowing the embedding of Nagorno-Karabakh within a common cultural, political, and security space with Armenia. For Azerbaijan, the alternative strategy has been to build up its defense capacity and to destabilize the ceasefire in operations that, of course, Baku sees as counteroffensives, but militarily speaking, are designed to challenge Armenia's control and local Armenian forces' control of the territory, and thereby to refocus international attention on the conflict and to increase its leverage. I think Amanda is absolutely right that there's been an insufficient attention, there has been complacency and a kind of a defaulting to Russia's kind of first among equals status within the Minsk group. And this crisis, I think, has called Russia's bluff. It's exposed the incoherence of Russia's policy, and that I think accounts for the passivity that we've seen from the Kremlin in the past few days.
Tengiz, interestingly enough, Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan came to power in 2018. He was lauded as a fresh face, as someone who can bring new blood, infuse new bloods and hope into this conflict. Those hopes did not quite materialize, did they?
Absolutely, I agree. In the very beginning, there was the real hope for the peaceful solution, and even I can recall the meetings and the statements of the both leaders, I mean, Pashinyan and Ilham Aliyev, even their dispute at the Munich Security Conference. Of course, they didn't agree upon, but it still made the hope that they can sit together and negotiate this process. But after 2018, I think so many things changed, and we saw the recent development. We saw so many clashes, even just a few months ago, beyond the Karabakh, exactly at the border between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So I think Pashinyan also is exercised kind of internal clashes, as well as some external pressure. And today, before our conversation, I saw the statement of the Mr. Pushkov from Russian Duma that what now they are witnessing, it's the result of pro-Western policy of Pashinyan. So I couldn't claim that this is the official position of Russia, but I will not surprise if tomorrow we'll discover that it really was some serious pressure from Moscow because of some, let's say, brave statements of Pashinyan regarding the European Union and regarding the West.
Amanda, the international community calls on both Azerbaijan and Armenia to stop the violence and resume the dialogue. But the international pressure can go only so far in this conflict, can it? At the end of the day, both Azerbaijan and Armenia have to solve this on their own. Ultimately, they have to deal with one another, don't they?
Yes, that's correct, and that's why they've been, in part of the Minsk Group process for almost the last 30 years. But I mean, it obviously helps if you have very strong external voices speaking. I think the fact that the United States has been missing from the region for quite some time and has shown literally no interest whatsoever in this new uptick in violence is not very helpful. Put it that way. But I mean, clearly it's up to both of them to find a solution. But I think, I want to repeat that was what was said in the beginning. I mean, from the Azerbaijani side in particular, the fact that it's been, 3 decades where they haven't been able to get not even one occupied territory back is extremely frustrating.
It is indeed. Laurence, if you have been called up to mediate this conflict and devise a diplomatic plan to bring peace in the region, what would be your 2-3 top priorities here?
Well, I think the top priorities are security and politics. If you look at the dynamic over the last 5-6 years in particular, the consistent Armenian demand has been for security. So Armenia has presented itself as being compliant with the terms of OSCE mediation, calling for mechanisms to investigate violations of the ceasefire and thereby increase the security of the Armenian population in Nagorno-Karabakh. Azerbaijan has been calling for what it calls substantive talks, real talks rather than an imitation of a negotiation process that would result in significant political gains, such as the recovery of 1, 2, or more of the occupied territories around Nagorno-Karabakh. So I think those are the two priorities. I think another key issue is inclusiveness in the peace process. Armenia and Azerbaijan are recognized by OSCE mediation as the official parties to the conflict. The Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh itself and the Karabakh Azerbaijani population displaced from the territory are recognized as indirect parties. They haven't really had a voice to date, and yet they are the populations that are most directly affected by the lack of a resolution and by insecurity. So I think a reformulated, more inclusive peace process that would deliver on politics but would also increase security. And that may mean a much more serious conversation about the deployment of peacekeeping forces.
Tengiz, one country that has not been named in particular throughout today's discussion is the United States, of course. It's a country that is right in the midst of a deadly pandemic, but of course, a very heated US election campaign. Where do you see Washington's role in this conflict?
I think that Washington's role could be more active, and it's always crucial, you know, because without its very strong position and the leadership, very frankly, I can't see the real solution. I think what we need from Washington and from others, it's very clear understanding that we are not talking about just a clash. We are talking about the possibility of the real regional war and regional instability, which affects not just Armenia and Azerbaijan, but it affects so many countries of the region. So Washington's position to start negotiation process will be extremely important. And I think Washington has enough leverage and enough connection with both parties to ensure that this is path to nowhere. There is no military solution of this conflict. And by the way, just a few days ago, it was a statement from the Georgian side. You know that we keep our military neutrality, but at the same time, we already offered our territory as a platform for negotiation, which will be very natural for both for Azerians and for Armenians. So I think that the real engagement of the international community could open the new rooms for the real conversation, real communication, because otherwise, once again, this is path to nowhere.
Right.
There is no winner and no military solution.
No winners and certainly no military solution, says Tengiz. Amanda, what could a diplomatic solution look like? And frankly, how realistic do you think it's going to be in the next few weeks and months?
Well, I think in the next few weeks, you know, a diplomatic solution will be impossible. It takes much longer than that, but I mean, one can only hope that it will be a diplomatic solution, that this current renewed warfare won't continue for much longer, that there will be, you know, an agreement for a ceasefire in the next few days. But I mean, I think that the situation is different to how it was before, simply because of the involvement of Turkey. I mean, Turkey's policy towards the conflict has changed totally in its narrative, and it reflects Turkey's policy in other parts of its neighborhood, where it's become more proactive and more robust in its approach. I mean, Turkey's trying to show that it supports its friends. So I don't see how any diplomatic solution now is going to be going forward without some sort of new role for Turkey, probably together with Russia, frankly speaking. And this reflects actually the sort of new, if I could say, opportunist relationship that Turkey and Russia have evolved themselves into in the southern neighbourhood. In Syria, in Libya, etc.
There's the wake-up call.
They get ahead. They've managed to work.
There's a wake-up call to both nations, to both Azerbaijan and Armenia, to solve this long-standing conflict diplomatically. Tengiz Pkhaladze, Laurence Broers, and Amanda Paul, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your perspective on this conflict that has captured the international attention. And thank you out there for watching, of course. Hope to see you again next time for a new edition of Newsmakers.